TV. I am looking forward to this conversation. Joining me now is Darryl Judd, Head of Integration and Business Growth, IMEA at MAERSK. Thank you so much for making it to join us this afternoon. I like the title. It says, Through the Eyes of Darryl Judd.
I think there's something scary there, isn't there? But yeah, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me, Terryanne, and may I compliment you on the interviews you've done today. I think, one of the reasons we come to these events is to get like-minded people into a room like this to really untangle some of the issues, but also look at the opportunities to advance the continent of Africa. And I think what we've heard today from a lot of your guests is some of those challenges and how we can actually build a better future.
So what has stood out for you today? Right from the opening session, and for me, I was sitting there listening to Mokhtar Diop saying, 10 years ago we said Africa can, and now we should be saying, for the past 10 years actually, that Africa is. And you alluded to it, that there's opportunities and there's things that we can do as a continent. So what has stood out for you today?
That's such a big question. There's been so many things, but I think for me the highlight this morning was listening to the theme of Africa is, and it will, and it's doing it and it's showing it. We need better leadership, and I think that was great to see that finally acknowledged. The responsibility for that leadership doesn't just rest with our leaders we put in power, it rests with all of us, taking accountability for delivering on the promise of growth for Africa, the igniting of the things like supply chain and logistics, the manufacturing capabilities, the use of how we use our raw materials to drive greater in-country value, and actually an economic framework that allows that to come together in a unified sense that creates jobs. And that's what we're all trying to achieve. And so today we've heard a lot of themes of those conversations, how digital is allowing us to bypass some of the more traditional roads to get there, how if we can embrace the harnessing of our labour force and educate them around that technology, we'll get there in a more unified way, a more faster way. If we can continue to evolve our infrastructure that supports a lower logistics cost and removes complexity, much like what we're trying to do and others are trying to do at MAERSK, then actually together we can build a better future. And for me, there are a lot of themes that we've heard today, and I think that really does articulate some of the opportunities we have to go back and stop the talking and start executing.
All right, so let's get to the talking, and I want to now see through your eyes. We've seen a recent upswing in the logistics space, so to speak. What would you say are some of the things that have been driving that growth? Whether it is in shipping, but generally the industry as a whole. What impact has it had, and what was driving the upswing?
That's such a great question. And I think, for me, when I look at the growth and I look at it through the eyes of MAERSK and our customers, there's no doubt in my mind that the pandemic that we came out of in 2020 really did reshape the way our consumers thought about the way they want to interact with our goods, the way they want to buy, the relationships they want to have with their trusted vendors. And that's necessitated an entire shift of economic demand. We're seeing much more manufacturing move across different parts of the world now, away from its traditional places in Asia and largely China, to de-risk around Mexico, around India, and of course around the continent of Africa, which has so much potential. We're also seeing the emergence of a highly educated workforce in Africa, much of which are people that look like you, right? Women in the workforce. The penetration of women in the workforce means dual income families. Dual income families, greater consumer, we invest back in our family wealth and what we do with that, whether it's processed goods or whether it's a demand for more luxury items or even just the basic necessities that we can now afford. That reshifts our spending patterns. All of which I think is one of these major reasons why we're seeing such an upswing in demand. And it's also why I believe the future growth engine of the world sits in these emerging markets that you and I sit in here today. We are here in Kigali. What better country is an example of harnessing some of the potential of that for its citizens and the potential this nation has?
Darryl, we're seeing data showing, an increased demand of African products from the Asian markets, China, to be specific for one. How do you see that space panning out over the next couple of years with Africa, especially now with Africa trading with each other a bit more, and hopefully then also taking advantage of the economies of scale to export in higher, in higher numbers? How do you see that space playing out specifically from an Africa-Asia perspective?
That's a very good question, and I think I'd like to tackle that through a slightly different way, if it's okay with you, Terryanne. I think if we look at what the Continental Free Trade Agreement set out to achieve, and although I think we still have some roads to go to ratify all of that, we're seeing countries really position themselves. Ghana, Rwanda, automotive assembly, domestic automotive policies that are now producing cars in Africa for African consumption. Those products are also now finding their way back into Western markets as we export. Agriculture is another great example. You know, we're seeing increasingly in the agriculture sector, we're no longer a food basin to serve ourselves, but we're actually exporting finished goods, shelf-ready material, which you'll find in Marks and Spencer's or Tesco's and Sainsbury's any day of the week. And the product isn't going in raw form. The in-country value is being created back in processing, production, and technology that allows us now to have a highly valued good sent back into those markets as opposed to exporting something that's only either partially processed or is in its raw form. And I think what we'll see over the next few years as we seek for a stronger manufacturing base, we support goods that are made by Africans for Africa to support that rise in consumption, is the opportunity to create large-scale manufacturing using the resources we have here in Africa, but not exporting the value of that, bringing that back. And we're seeing in West Africa, of course, the cap down on exporting product and putting more processing food production in place for export. And I think that value addition is where we're going to see growth. And then the byproduct of that is self-perpetuating, more jobs, higher wealth, etc. And I think what it's encouraging is, if we look back at when we were talking last time a year ago, we're now seeing fruits and signs of that actually the transformation's real. And to the point this morning, is it Africa can do? No, Africa is doing. And I think that's the big step we made.
All right, you've talked about technology, and of course we cannot underscore, the importance of technology in advancing, not just logistics, but the entire industry as a whole. And I'm just curious from an infrastructure perspective. A lot has been done. We've seen a number of countries really invest, especially in port infrastructure. How would you talk about the status of infrastructure that supports logistics in that space?
That's a very good question, right? It's a super question because if we look at the current demand upswing that you talked about, and of course where the network is reasonably disrupted, and if you think about normalization of disruption, we're seeing some of those bottleneck challenges in our infrastructure, particularly around ports. So the thing that we're doing as MAERSK is starting to put together the threads of knitting together a connected network where we can digitize that and at the first level give our customers visibility. With visibility, you can plan, you can forecast, you can sequence better. As you do that, you start to untangle some of that inefficiency that sits in the supply chain. It becomes visual to you, and with that visual, you can take corrective action or you can invest accordingly to be able to remedy that. And that's what MAERSK is doing to do that. What's encouraging is, I think, that most governments now are recognizing for Africa to be competitive as an export continent and to sell its goods abroad, which is where that demand is, you pointed to that earlier, you also need to lower the cost of logistics. And part of that is about the efficiency that sits within the supply chain. And that means having an active program to upgrade your infrastructure, working with organizations like ours and others that are prepared to invest in that or co-invest in that in the betterment of our customers to do that. It's an essential part of the value chain if we want to lower the cost of logistics and do business more economically and more soundly.
We've also had let me call it a global call for capital. So public capital, private capital, development capital. And I'm just curious from your perspective, how do you see that space panning out? Are these some of the conversations you will be having at the Africa CEO Forum? And how do you see that taking off?
It's a very good question, and investments sit within a portfolio that I have as well, where we look at investments very carefully. There was an interesting comment made this morning in the opening remarks, and that is for Africa to continue to be investable, the access to capital and availability of capital is not the issue. The capital's there, and we've heard many themes of that today. It's really around the same decisions that we take as an organisation. What is our risk profile? Is it supported by a sensible business case that can be demonstrated over the life of the investment? And am I confident that we can execute it and execute it well on the ground with the least amount of risk of failure. Now, once we answer those questions and we build a track record of project delivery, capital is easy to access. It's readily available today. It's those barriers that we need to get better at. And so if I look at what we do at MAERSK, we are continually assessing investments. We invest with our customers, so our customers come on that journey with us as part of their commitment, and it's continually looked at, can we execute this appropriately in line with the business case? Can we control and manage risk accordingly? And does this add value over the period of time? In other words, what else do we link that to that unlocks greater value for our customers and our supply chains? And I don't think that's any different to decisions that either other private enterprise makes or government's starting to make as well.
All right. So, Darryl, as we come to a close, what's your outlook, for the logistics industry as we're right at the halfway mark of 2024? How do you see the rest of the year looking? What are some trends or things that we should look out for?
So I'll answer that in two ways. Firstly, let me give you the short-term view, right? And if I think about there'll be plenty of supply chain managers and CEOs listening to this discussion around, well, what is the insights on what's going to happen next quarter and the quarter after? And will I see port congestion reduce? Is my trucking going to improve? At a tactical level, I think the second half of the year will certainly be an improvement over the first half. We're getting much better now at rerouting networks and getting equipment where it needs to be, unlocking the value of infrastructures to adjust to the normalised supply chain in today's world. So H2 will continue to be a little bit disrupted, but we'll certainly see that more easily forecastable. So that's that. Coming into 25 and beyond, one of the reasons that we're here, and MAERSK has been in Africa for a very long time, as you pointed out earlier, we are incredibly bullish on Africa. Like many of the organisations participate in this trade show, in the group that you bring together, is we see a future for Africa. We see Africa not just at the table, but actually leading the table. The next economic boom will be from these emerging markets. And I think we've finally reached a point where there's a unified view between the economic, the geographic, the political, and the private enterprise will to do so. And I'm very, very bullish on Africa. I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg of what's possible.
Well, what a way to end the conversation, bullish about Africa. I have been speaking with Darryl Judd, the head of integration and business growth, IMEA at MAERSK. Thank you so much for making time to speak with us this afternoon, and enjoy Kigali.
Sante Sana, thank you very much, Terryanne.
All right, we will be back in a moment, so don't go too far.